Welcome to InfoStream, your daily current. Unsure what to listen to? Turn to us for today's headlines. Stay informed. Ukraine faces ongoing attacks and power outages. Russian oil transport interrupted by Black Sea attacks. UN panel Alleges systemic torture by Israel. Orban's meeting intensifies Ukraine-Russia conflict. Guinea-Bissau instability. National Airbus grounded due to solar radiation fears. National GOP announces pardon for Honduran President Yermak's Ouster impacts Ukraine's future as military strikes Advertisements. Questions real struggles right earlier. Metaphase Erodes terror all Erodes. Charging over area fraud, Sudanese conflict, see charitable, further for the control while the fees over the Widespread power outages and attacks continue in Ukraine. Over 600 Zalozan residents of the Kyiv region experienced power outages Saturday morning following a significant Russian overnight attack. The Ukrainian Energy Ministry attributed the disruption to missile and drone strikes targeting energy infrastructure, with over 500 Zalozan without power in Kyiv itself. Russia's defense ministry claimed the strikes were directed at Ukraine's military-industrial complex and related energy facilities. The attacks resulted in 3 fatalities and dozens of injuries, including a 13-year-old child injured in Kyiv. Emergency services responded to numerous reports of explosions and damage across Kyiv, with several residential buildings impacted. Detec Energy reported restoring power to over 360,000 families. Ukrainian Air Force personnel successfully shot down 558 drones and 19 missiles, demonstrating a concerted effort to intercept the incoming threats. This escalation of attacks mirrors previous patterns throughout Ukraine's full-scale invasion since February 2022, frequently causing widespread blackouts during the winter months. Ukraine has retaliated by targeting Russian energy infrastructure, including oil refineries and depots, utilizing long-range weaponry to disrupt Moscow's war effort through its key export revenue stream. Recent actions included strikes against 2 oil tankers within the Shadow Fleet, a tactic aimed at circumventing international sanctions. Video footage depicted a waterborne drone attacking one of the vessels, followed by visible fire and smoke. The ongoing conflict continues to prioritize the disruption of critical infrastructure, with Ukrainian forces actively defending against the sustained attacks. The situation highlights the continued vulnerability of Ukrainian civilians and infrastructure amidst the ongoing war. Black Sea attacks disrupt Russian oil transport. Recent coordinated attacks in the Black Sea, utilizing Ukrainian underwater drones, have significantly disrupted Russia's oil transportation network. Ukrainian security services, in conjunction with the Navy, deployed Sea Baby maritime drones to strike 2 Russian tankers belonging to the Shadow Fleet, causing critical damage and effectively rendering them out of service. This action is expected to have a substantial impact on the flow of Russian oil to international markets, defying existing sanctions. A Gambian-flagged tanker, the Virat, was initially attacked on Friday and subsequently sustained further damage, now located approximately 50 kilometers off the Turkish coast awaiting orders. The United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union have previously sanctioned the Virat under different names. Another Russian crude oil tanker, the Gambian-flagged Kairos, experienced an explosion Friday, leading to the evacuation of its 25 crew members. The Kairos, 275-meter vessel weighing nearly 80,000 tons, was previously sanctioned by the EU and recently returned to Novorossiysk from an Indian port. Adding to the escalating situation, a marine drone launched an attack on a mooring point at the Russian port of Novorossiysk, a crucial hub for the Caspian Pipeline Consortium's oil transport from Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan has subsequently activated a plan to reroute export volumes through alternative routes. Novorossiysk has been repeatedly targeted by Ukrainian drones. Turkish maritime authorities dispatched a firefighting tugboat to address a fire on the Kairos's open deck, which was later extinguished. These attacks highlight the growing intensity of the conflict and its impact on global energy markets, demonstrating a clear strategy by Ukraine to impede Russian oil exports. The ongoing attacks underscore the vulnerability of Russian shipping operations in the Black Sea. A UN panel accuses Israel of systemic torture. A United Nations Committee on Torture has released a damning report concluding that Israel is operating a de facto state policy of organized and widespread torture. The committee's assessment stems from a thorough review process involving testimonies from both Israeli and Palestinian rights groups, examining the conditions within Israeli detention centers following the October 7, 2023 Hamas attacks. The report highlights the extensive detentions of Palestinians, with thousands reportedly held under Israeli law regarding administrative detention and unlawful combatants. Critics allege that individuals, including children, pregnant women, and the elderly are detained without legal representation or contact with family members, leading to accusations of enforced disappearance. The committee's scrutiny focuses on the conditions within these facilities, detailing widespread abuses. Palestinians have reported systematic deprivation of food and water, alongside severe beatings, attacks by dogs, electrocution, and instances of sexual violence. Disturbingly, some individuals have allegedly been permanently shackled, denied access to sanitation facilities, and forced to use diapers. The committee's findings categorize this treatment as constituting war crimes and crimes against humanity. A central assertion is that the reported actions represent evidence of a de facto state policy of organized and widespread torture, potentially meeting the criteria for genocide under international law. This assertion is particularly significant given Israel's repeated denials of accusations of genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. The report's conclusions represent a serious condemnation of Israel's detention practices and raise significant concerns regarding human rights violations within its legal system. The committee's investigation underscores the urgency of addressing allegations of systematic abuse and its potential implications for international law. Orban's Moscow meeting fuels Ukraine-Russia conflict. A Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban recently met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow, a move that has intensified the geopolitical tensions surrounding the ongoing war in Ukraine. This meeting, the second since the conflict's escalation in 2022, underscores Orban's continued alignment with Putin and his defiance of European Union and NATO solidarity. The visit occurred ahead of planned Russia-US talks, with Putin expressing gratitude for Budapest's proposed role as a summit location, facilitated by an enthusiastic endorsement from former US President Donald Trump. Orban's motivations appear multifaceted, primarily driven by his upcoming parliamentary elections in April, where his Fidesz party faces a potential defeat for the first time in 15 years. Hosting a Trump-Putin summit could significantly bolster his re-election prospects. Simultaneously, Orban is pursuing a strategy to secure Russian energy supplies for Hungary, Slovakia, and Serbia, challenging EU efforts to eliminate European imports of Russian oil and gas. The meeting coincided with Orban's call for immediate, unconditional peace talks with the EU and Russia, rejecting further EU funding for Ukraine and the utilization of frozen Russian assets for Ukrainian defense. He has consistently criticized EU leaders as warmongering for adapting the Trump's 28-point peace plan to accommodate Ukrainian concerns. Key Russian officials, including Yuri Ushakov, participated, signaling Russia's willingness to engage in negotiations. Orban's actions represent a significant challenge to Western efforts to isolate Russia and support Ukraine, highlighting the complex and fragmented nature of the conflict and the divergent political strategies employed by key actors. The prospect of a Budapest summit, though initially stalled due to Russian demands, remains a potential catalyst in the delicate diplomatic maneuvering surrounding the war. Guinea-Bissau coup, a stagecraft of instability. A coup led by General Horta Ntam has plunged Guinea-Bissau into turmoil, with ousted President Umaro Sissoko Embalo fleeing to Senegal. Following a day of gunfire and political maneuvering, the military suspended the presidential election results and declared itself in control, citing a plot to destabilize the country. West African political figures, including Nigeria's former President Goodluck Jonathan and Senegal's Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko, believe the coup was staged, describing it as a sham or ceremonial coup. Jonathan questioned the events preceding the coup, contrasting it with previous coups in the region. Embalo, who had previously faced accusations of fabricating crises to suppress dissent, arrived in Senegal following negotiations by the regional West African bloc Accuses. The military's actions followed a day before the planned announcement of election results, which Embalo and his rival Fernando Dias had already claimed to have won. The military, led by General Ntam, has imposed a curfew and banned public protests, further exacerbating tensions in the coup-prone nation, known for its drug trafficking and history of military takeovers. Several local civil society groups accuse Embalo of orchestrating a simulated coup to prevent the release of unfavorable election results. Dias echoed these claims, asserting his status as the president-elect. Embalo has a history of surviving multiple coup attempts during his presidency, but critics accuse him of manipulating crises. The legislature and several state institutions have been largely non-operational throughout his tenure. ECOWAS has suspended Guinea-Bissau from all decision-making bodies until constitutional order is restored, and the African Union and the UN have condemned the coup. Sierra Leonean President Julius Maada Bio facilitated Embalo's safe evacuation. The situation highlights Guinea-Bissau's deep-seated political instability and vulnerability to military intervention, with a history of 9 coups in 5 decades. The ongoing events underscore the urgent need for a return to constitutional normalcy and a sustainable path towards democratic governance. Airbus grounding affects thousands of planes due to solar radiation concerns, following the discovery of a potential vulnerability related to solar radiation interference. Airbus initiated a global grounding of approximately 6,000 A320 aircraft, representing half of its global fleet. The issue stemmed from an investigation into an incident involving a JetBlue Airways flight that experienced an emergency landing in Florida due to a sudden loss of altitude, potentially caused by a coronal mass ejection (CME). Experts, including former Canada's captain Dr. Ian Getley, explained that CME's powerful bursts of plasma from the sun can release heavily charged particles into the Earth's atmosphere, particularly above 28,000 feet. These particles can interfere with the electronics of aircraft and satellites. The grounding impacted airlines worldwide, with significant disruptions reported across Europe and North America. Airlines like Air France experienced flight delays and cancellations out of Charles de Gaulle Airport, while American Airlines and Delta Airlines anticipated operational delays and expected to complete the software updates within the weekend. Jetstar canceled 90 flights in Australia due to a third of its fleet being affected, with continued disruption expected. Approximately 100 aircraft required a relatively simple software update, typically taking around 3 hours to complete. However, 900 older aircraft models necessitated a physical replacement of onboard computers, leading to extended downtime. Airbus acknowledged the operational disruption and apologized for the inconvenience. Airlines were taking varied approaches to address the issue. Wizz Air confirmed completion of the update overnight, allowing for normal operations. EasyJet reported having already started and completed the software update on many aircraft, planning a full service on Saturday. Despite efforts, disruption persisted, particularly in Australia, highlighting the complexity of managing global operations during a high-volume travel period like Thanksgiving. The situation represents a significant and unusual event in aviation, emphasizing the potential vulnerability of aircraft electronics to space weather phenomena. National Guard shooting fuels anti-immigration crackdown. Recent news articles detail a significant escalation in anti-immigration rhetoric and policy following the shooting of 2 National Guard members in Washington, D.C. The core narrative centers on President Donald Trump's response, characterized by a heightened focus on immigration enforcement and a pledge to dramatically reshape immigration policies. The immediate aftermath saw Trump initiating a comprehensive review of all green cards issued to individuals from countries of concern, initially focusing on Afghanistan, Iran, and Venezuela, as determined by a June presidential proclamation. This review extends to all asylum cases approved under the Biden administration, leading to a temporary pause in asylum decisions pending thorough vetting procedures. Furthermore, Trump is advocating for a permanent pause on migration from all third world countries and intends to reserve federal benefits exclusively for U.S. citizens. This strategy involves a complete re-examination of the immigration system. The shooting has intensified existing concerns about the vetting process for Afghan refugees, who have resettled in the U.S. since August 2021, with over 190,000 individuals having arrived. Despite this, Trump insists that the suspect's isolated act shouldn't define an entire community. Trump's administration is also implementing measures to restrict visa issuances for travelers with Afghan passports. This is coupled with the administration's intent to block undocumented immigrants from receiving federal tax-based benefits. Key figures involved include President Donald Trump, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Director Joseph Edlow, and Stephen Miller, Trump's Deputy Chief of Staff and architect of his immigration policy. Sean Vandiver, CEO of Afghanivac, voiced concerns about the potential for the shooting to negatively impact the Afghan community in the United States. The situation highlights a broader trend of heightened scrutiny regarding immigration policies and security measures within the U.S. The events underscore the complex interplay between national security concerns, humanitarian considerations, and the rights of immigrant communities. Trump announces intent to pardon former Honduran President Hernández. Former United States President Donald Trump has announced his intention to grant a full and complete pardon to Juan Orlando Hernández, the former Honduran president currently serving a 45-year prison sentence in the U.S. for drug trafficking and firearms offenses. This decision follows Hernández's conviction in 2024 on charges related to conspiring to import cocaine into the U.S. and possessing machine guns. The pardon announcement coincided with the upcoming Honduran general elections on Sunday, where Nasri Tito Esfura, a conservative National Party candidate, is a leading contender. Hernández, who served as president of Honduras from 2014 to 2022, was extradited to the U.S. in April 2022 after being charged with facilitating the movement of over 400 tons of cocaine from Honduras to the United States in exchange for millions of dollars in bribes. Prosecutors alleged that Hernández protected and enriched drug traffickers within his inner circle, utilizing his executive power to support extraditions of traffickers who threatened his political control, while promising continued impunity to those who paid him and followed his instructions. Trump's support for Asfura is explicitly linked to the election outcome, stating that the United States will be very supportive if Asfura wins, emphasizing confidence in his policies and potential benefits for Honduras. Conversely, Trump warned that the U.S. will not be throwing good money after bad if Asfura loses, highlighting the potential for catastrophic results under a wrong leader. The situation mirrors ongoing U.S. efforts to counter drug trafficking, particularly targeting Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's regime, which is accused of enabling drug trafficking routes to European markets. U.S. military activity, including Operation Southern Spear, has intensified in the Caribbean in response. Hernández's attorney expressed gratitude to Trump and anticipates his triumphant return to Honduras. The attorney characterized the pardon as a correction of a lawfare and a political prosecution, expressing optimism for a future partnership between the U.S. and Honduras. The U.S. government has been actively involved in Honduras's affairs, including supporting the extradition treaty and conducting military operations against transnational organized crime. The election of Asfura is seen as critical to the U.S.'s strategic interests in the region. Andriy Yermak's fall and its implications for Ukraine, the recent downfall of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, marks a significant, albeit turbulent, moment in the ongoing conflict and Ukraine's diplomatic efforts. Following a raid on his Kiev residence by anti-corruption investigators, Yermak resigned, triggering a wave of uncertainty and scrutiny surrounding the Ukrainian government. The scandal centers on allegations of misappropriated funds within the energy sector, implicating senior figures including Yermak himself and his former business partner, Timur Mindik. Yermak's rise to power alongside Zelensky in 2019, initially lauded for his negotiation skills and role in securing international support, had gradually become increasingly unpopular. Critics viewed him as an electorally unaccountable figure, effectively functioning as a shadow prime minister, controlling appointments and shaping policy. The corruption allegations, coupled with a series of other challenges, including a troubled introduction of mobilization policies and a strained relationship with former army chief, significantly eroded public trust. The timing of Yermak's resignation, coinciding with a visit by Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban to Moscow, and amidst ongoing negotiations with the United States, has been interpreted as detrimental to Ukraine's diplomatic position. Russian officials have seized on the situation to further undermine Zelensky's legitimacy and sow discord. U.S. officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, were engaged in discussions with Yermak shortly before his resignation. Zelensky, acknowledging the gravity of the situation, called for unity and emphasized the need to reset his administration. Despite the challenges, Zelensky intends to continue diplomatic efforts, including a planned trip to the United States. The immediate impact is a leadership vacuum and increased scrutiny of the Ukrainian government. Finding a replacement for Yermak, someone Zelensky can fully trust, presents a considerable hurdle, particularly amidst the demands of war and international negotiations. The situation highlights the fragility of Ukraine's democratic institutions and the ongoing struggle to maintain stability in the face of both external aggression and internal challenges. The dismissal underscores the precariousness of Zelensky's position and the significant political ramifications of the unfolding corruption scandal. U.S. military's Caribbean strikes spark legal and ethical concerns. The United States military's ongoing strikes against suspected drug trafficking vessels in the Caribbean have ignited significant controversy, raising legal and ethical questions regarding their justification and execution. Beginning in September, the military conducted a series of attacks, initially targeting a vessel identified as carrying Tren de Aragua narco-terrorists within the Southcom area of responsibility, as announced by President Donald Trump via Truth Social. Following a first strike that disabled the boat and resulted in deaths, the military carried out a second strike to sink the vessel and eliminate the remaining crew, bringing the total death toll to 11. Despite the administration's claims of compliance with the law of armed conflict and the targeting of terrorist organizations, multiple sources revealed that the military was aware of survivors in the water following the initial strike. The second strike, described as a double tap, was undertaken to ensure the vessel's destruction and the neutralization of the remaining individuals. Legal experts and international law specialists have strongly criticized the operation, arguing that the suspected traffickers were civilians, not combatants, and that the strikes constituted extrajudicial killings. Concerns have been raised about the targeting of incapacitated individuals and the violation of the rules governing the conduct of hostilities. The administration's legal justification, based on a classified Justice Department opinion authorizing lethal strikes against 24 cartels due to an imminent threat to Americans, has been met with skepticism. Several key developments underscore the controversy. The UK ceased sharing intelligence due to concerns about complicity. Alvin Halsey, commander of U.S. Southern Command, expressed reservations and offered to resign, and multiple DOD lawyers voiced objections. The administration attempted to defend the strikes, emphasizing their lawful nature and alignment with the law of armed conflict. However, the evidence suggests a departure from established practices, which previously relied on law enforcement and the Coast Guard to address illicit drug trafficking, with traffickers afforded due process rights. The strikes represent a significant escalation of the U.S. military's involvement in countering drug trafficking, prompting intense debate about the legality and morality of the operation. The fallout over Reeves' budget, a crisis of trust and economic uncertainty. The ongoing fallout from Chancellor Rachel Reeves' budget is dominating media coverage, primarily centered around accusations of misleading the public, and a broader crisis of trust surrounding the government's economic forecasts. The Office for Budget Responsibility, OBR, revealed that Reeves was informed well in advance of the budget's release that the public finances were in a better shape than she presented, specifically that a higher than anticipated rise in wages would offset a previously projected productivity downgrade. This revelation has fueled intense criticism, with numerous outlets branding Reeves as deceptive and demanding accountability. Key figures, including conservative leader Kemi Badenoch, have called for Reeves' dismissal, citing lies and record tax hikes. The Daily Mail, The Sun, and The Telegraph all utilized headlines emphasizing Reeves' alleged deception, while The Guardian features an interview defending her choices as fair and necessary. The Times describes the budget as smoke and mirrors, focusing on the significant tax increases, particularly within the hospitality sector, and the mansion tax impacting wealthy homeowners attempting to avoid a council tax surcharge. The Financial Times highlights the government's attempts to secure contributions from wealthy individuals to address public service deficits, while the Daily Express reports on the impact of the budget on pensioners, with 2.2 million set to lose their winter fuel payments. The Guardian also investigates a hidden crisis of methanol poisoning among young people traveling abroad, featuring the tragic story of Bethany Clark. The Daily Mail has a world-exclusive investigation into the identity of the man claiming to be the real Mo Farah, Hussein Abdi Kahin, revealing the complex circumstances surrounding the Olympian's origins. The Times has a detailed report on Prince Edward's lease of his Surrey mansion from the Crown Estate, disclosing the payments made. Finally, the Daily Star focuses on football star Wayne Rooney's outspoken criticism of the children's television program Mr. Tumble. The core narrative revolves around the credibility of Reeves' economic assessments and the resulting public outcry, with significant media attention dedicated to the implications for her position and the government's overall strategy. House GOP faces crisis of control. The House of Representatives is currently experiencing a severe crisis of control, characterized by infighting, personal attacks, and a breakdown in legislative productivity. Speaker Mike Johnson's leadership is being challenged by a fractious Republican conference and increasingly bold attempts by individual members to circumvent party leadership. Recent events, including a failed push to release Jeffrey Epstein files, numerous attempts to punish colleagues through discharge petitions, and the surprising resignation of Marjorie Taylor Greene, have exacerbated the situation. The GOP's slim majority is under significant strain, fueled by a growing number of Republicans seeking new offices, a contentious primary landscape orchestrated by Donald Trump, and concerns over redistricting efforts. Trump's rhetoric, including calls for violence against political opponents, has intensified threats against Democratic lawmakers and contributed to a climate of fear. Several key issues are contributing to the instability. The ongoing debate over Obamacare, coupled with the need to pass government funding measures, presents significant challenges. The use of discharge petitions, once rare, has become a more frequent tactic, reflecting a lack of confidence in Johnson's ability to maintain control. Proposals to ban lawmaker stock trading are also facing resistance, further complicating the legislative process. Efforts to reform House procedures, such as lowering the threshold for censure and increasing the standards for disciplinary action, are gaining traction. Several members, including both Republicans and Democrats, recognize the need to restore the institution's integrity and prevent further descent into partisan warfare. The rise in political violence, spurred by Trump's rhetoric, has prompted calls for a more measured and respectful approach to political discourse. The situation is further complicated by the departure of prominent figures like Green, who cited concerns about the party's direction. Members are increasingly frustrated with the lack of collaboration and the prevalence of personal attacks, leading to a decline in morale and a heightened sense of instability within the House. The potential for further disruptions remains high as the midterm elections approach and the GOP grapples with its internal divisions. The focus now is on finding a way to stabilize the House and restore its ability to govern effectively, a task that appears increasingly difficult given the current climate. Nigeria blames jihadist groups, but analysts dispute kidnapping origins. Recent waves of kidnappings in Nigeria's northwest and central regions, involving hundreds of victims, including children, are attributed by the Nigerian government to jihadist groups, specifically ISWAP, a splinter of Boko Haram, and what remains of Boko Haram. However, analysts argue that local criminal gangs, known as bandits, are primarily responsible. The government, led by President Bola Tinubu, has not presented concrete evidence supporting its claims. 3 mass kidnappings occurred in November, including one at a secondary school in Kebbi State, 17th, another in Kwara State's 18th, and a large-scale abduction from a Catholic school in Niger State, the 21st, with over 2 to 50 children taken. Ransom payments are illegal, despite allegations of widespread non-compliance. Government officials, including presidential spokesman Sunday Dare, have repeatedly stated that kinetic, non-kinetic, negotiations, etc., are successful in securing the release of hostages, but have not provided timelines. The government's assertions are challenged by analysts like Bulama Bukarti, who insist there are no ISWAP or Boko Haram cells in the northwest. Accuses, an international monitoring group, has identified Fulani militia groups, known as bandits, as the perpetrators of the 3 recent kidnappings. These groups, operating primarily on motorbikes, are not centrally organized. Accuses' assessment reveals that the mass abduction of schoolchildren in Niger State was partially motivated by political objectives, and the attack in Kwara State was linked to the Fulani's expansionist ambitions and illegal mining activities. The group's actions mirror patterns observed in Zamfara and Birnin Gwari, Kaduna State. A separate abduction in Borno State, the stronghold of Boko Haram, was attributed to jihadist groups. Despite the government's stance, analysts emphasize that victims are from all faiths and that the violence is not solely targeted at Christians. The security crisis has garnered international attention, with threats of U.S. military intervention if the situation doesn't improve. The conflict's complexity stems from the involvement of multiple actors, including criminal gangs, Fulani militias, and jihadist groups, each with distinct motives and operational areas. Meta faces scrutiny over AI-generated fraudulent advertisements. By the recent investigations by the BBC have revealed widespread instances of deceptive advertising on Facebook and Instagram, perpetrated by companies utilizing artificial intelligence to create fraudulent representations of legitimate businesses. Numerous UK-based companies, including O'Melia and Oliver Jewels, Cecil V, Chester and Clare, Harrison and Hayes, Sylvia and Grace, and others, have been identified for misleading consumers through AI-generated images, fabricated backstories, and false claims of UK-based operations. These companies, frequently employing drop-shipping schemes, were selling cheap goods shipped from Asia, capitalizing on the perceived trustworthiness of Facebook advertising. The BBC's reporting uncovered a pattern of deceptive practices, with many of these companies using AI to generate realistic shopfront images and portray themselves as established, reputable brands. Consumers, such as Claire Brown, were drawn in by seemingly appealing advertisements, only to receive poorly made products. Meta has acknowledged the issue, stating that it has removed content from 6 identified companies and encourages users to report suspicious adverts. However, critics, including Which, and the Advertising Standards Authority, ASA, argue that Meta has allowed these fraudulent activities to run rampant for too long. The ASA has taken action against a British clothing firm using misleading imagery, highlighting the platform's role in maintaining responsible advertising. Meta's response focuses on user reporting, recognizing it as an important signal for its review systems. Consumers are advised to be wary of overly attractive offers, recently created accounts, and discrepancies between advertised claims and actual product quality. Trustpilot is recommended as a reliable source for verifying brand legitimacy, and potential buyers are urged to independently verify company websites and locations through online searches, particularly scrutinizing fabricated shopfronts for authenticity. Meta continues to engage with regulators to improve policies and prevent further fraudulent activity, acknowledging the need for enhanced consumer protection. The situation underscores the challenges of policing online advertising and the importance of vigilance from both platforms and users. The Sudanese conflict, a shifting intervention landscape, a Donald Trump's unexpected engagement in the Sudanese conflict, spurred by a briefing from Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, presents a complex and potentially fragile opportunity for peace. The protracted civil war, fueled by a 6-year stalemate between the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces, (RSF), has resulted in widespread atrocities, including mass killings and looting, particularly in the strategically vital city of El Fasher. The conflict has displaced nearly 12 million people and created dire humanitarian conditions. Initially, the Quad, comprising the United States, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, had developed a plan centered on a ceasefire, humanitarian access, and civilian-led government negotiations. This plan gained renewed momentum following Trump's intervention, aiming to leverage the U.S. president's relationships with key regional players, particularly UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. However, the situation is complicated by existing geopolitical rivalries. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are engaged in a power struggle for influence across the Arab world, and their differing views on the Muslim Brotherhood further complicate the mediation efforts. The UAE's support for the RSF, despite denials, remains a significant obstacle. The conflict's intensity is exacerbated by regional states supplying arms to opposing factions, with Egypt and Turkey bolstering the Sudanese army, while Saudi Arabia and the UAE have historically supported the RSF. Despite Trump's efforts, the UAE's prioritization of its own strategic interests, including the Abraham Accords and economic partnerships, limits the potential for immediate intervention. The Quad's plan faces challenges due to the Sudanese warring parties, deep-seated distrust, and the ongoing humanitarian crisis. Securing the necessary $3 billion in humanitarian aid is proving difficult, and the polarized Sudanese population remains skeptical of any external mediation. The conflict's legacy, rooted in decades of civil war and authoritarian rule, presents a formidable obstacle to achieving lasting peace. Ultimately, the success of Trump's intervention hinges on the UAE's willingness to shift its priorities and the Sudanese party's capacity to compromise.